Hello, everyone. Welcome to today's Todd Talk Leadership Podcast. I am Todd Marshall Hearnsberger, the host of this podcast and also the founder and CEO of Leadwell Solutions. I'm so glad you joined us today. And I have a question for you. The question is, as leaders, what are the things that you don't see about yourself? Maybe you don't see some things about your calling or even your potential. Well, today we're going to answer this question. We're going to do a deep dive on this and so much more. And I'm so happy to have Dr. John Morgan with me today. And so, Dr. John, I'm going to give you a proper introduction here, and then we're going to dive right in. You have 30 years experience in leadership practice, research, and advisement. You also are the founder of an organization called People Prosper International. You're a leadership advisor to multiple founders and executives. You also hold a PhD in organizational leadership and a Master's of Divinity degree. You are the author of multiple books, and one of the books is How to Discover Your Personal Life Mission. Another book called Horsepower, How Leadership Works. Another book, The Spirit of Creation, and also the Natural Leadership Profile Assessment. Well, you have a lot to share with us today, and we're so glad to have you. Dr. John, welcome to the Todd Talk Leadership Podcast.
Hey, thank you, man. It's great to be with you, Todd. And I love what you're doing in the dysfunctional and the functional leadership content that you're working on. And so, yeah, I just appreciate this opportunity. That was a very generous introduction. I'm listening to all that, thinking, wow, I didn't ask you to do that much of an intro, but you really, by the time you got done with that, I was like, man, no wonder I'm tired. So
I'm telling you, you may want to hire yourself for all your business stuff.
good night, man.
Well,
Okay.
I know we've recently made a strong connection and we've talked together offline and did what we call the leadership horsepower assessment or framework. And we're going to get into that here. But I'm anxious for people to really get to know what your expertise is, especially on the leadership horsepower framework and many of the other things you're doing. So even though I gave a 30,000 foot level of your credentials, why don't you give a little bit deeper understanding for people who don't know who you are and what your expertise is at a much deeper level?
One of my favorite quotes from Chuck Swindoll, and I don't know if it's original with him or not, but it has stuck with me where he said it takes a lifetime for a man to know who he is, to like who he is, and to be who he is. And that certainly has been my experience. I'm 66 years old, and I feel like I'm just new and kind of understanding who I am and liking who I am and trying to be who I am. So all that other stuff aside, kind of the heart of it is my gift is that I see what's missing in either leaders or in major social or religious systems. I look at them and almost without thinking, it comes to me, what's wrong here? What's not right about what I'm looking at? And usually it doesn't take long before it starts being clear to me, this is the major thing that's missing. And then I have to go on the research to, okay, how do we fill that piece in and get that piece put in? So one example of it is the nonprofit that you mentioned that I am the founder of People Prosper International. After spending a lifetime doing missions work in the poverty space, I knew intuitively something was huge was missing in how we deal with the poor. And just the short version of it is that we way overuse charity and we way underuse what I call biblical economic empowerment. I'm not against charity, but I'm against the overuse of it because it makes it worse. But that was an example, and it ended up being a very big calling in my life to, if I see a puzzle, there's two or three really big pieces in the middle that are missing. And it's like intuitive. I'm on it until I feel like, boom, this is what it is. So anyway, that's what we're doing in the poverty space. And what we're going to talk about today in leadership was the same thing. In the leadership space, which has always fascinated me since I was a kid. I grew up in a leadership rich environment. Always fascinated me how leaders do what they do, how they can do what they do, and how that you can look at any population of people, any room full of 100, and there's going to be some that can lead pretty well, and then some on the other end of the spectrum, which like man, they could barely lead themselves out of a paper bag, and then you got a whole lot of stuff in the middle, and you're like wondering what
Yeah.
is that? What is that? That is driving all of that, and that's been a lifelong pursuit of mine to say, okay, what's missing in the theory of leadership and the model of leadership, but also with individual leaders. I'm fascinated by individual leaders. So when I'm working with an individual leader, it's the same thing. It's I'm looking at the puzzle of their life, looking for those key missing pieces, trying to design kind of the architect of that this picture we're seeing that God has created. What are the missing pieces? It's not that not letting them fulfill their calling. So that was a long-winded way of saying I see what's missing and I try to fill in the gap.
So you describe yourself as a vision architect, which I love the title that you have there. What do you see in leaders most often that they don't see in themselves? Are there common traits that general leaders don't see in themselves?
Probably the most common is they don't appreciate the level at which their natural leadership capacity really is at, and they're not leveraging that capability. In other words, they're doing work at a lower level because it has to be done in the organization, and they're missing the power of having others hired who can handle that level of work to unleash them into higher level work. There was a book on leadership in the I think in the early 90s. I'm dating myself, but it's called Why Leaders Can't Lead. And it was by one of the books that really set off the whole leadership movement was a book called In Search of Excellence. And one of those authors then wrote the book Why Leaders Can't Lead. And their conclusion was right on. And the answer is they're so bogged down by the required tasks of their organization that they cannot do the most important thing that any leader does, and that is point the direction real clearly. This is where we're going. And they have to say it clearly, they have to say it compellingly, and they have to say it constantly, because every organization and every leader faces mission drift. It's because you have all these competing interests that come along beside you. They want to take it over here, take it over there, but it's always the job of the leader to say, no, if I don't do anything else, I'm going to point the direction of where we need to be going, and this is it. Well, you get diluted in that when you're trying to cover all the bases of just covering what's got to get done in your organization. So I would say that's one of the most common that I see.
Refresh my memory if you call this an assessment or framework, but it's called the leadership horsepower. What do you call it? Horsepower assessment or framework? Or you have a title for that?
Well, the construct that we're trying to assess for is leadership horsepower. So the broader leadership theory is leadership horsepower. The assessment, we call it the natural leadership profile, which is you're at your natural leadership strength. At what level of capability are you? Another way of calling it is leadership horsepower. That's a little bit of an intimidating word to say. We're going to do a leadership horsepower assessment on you because people are thinking, oh no, what if I don't have any of that? But the truth is, you have a really significant amount if you are leading anything and God's called you to it. So
Yeah.
just relax on that and let's figure out how to maximize that.
Well, let's expand on this subject of the leadership horsepower. I've got printouts here that I did to make sure I didn't get anything wrong, but there are 7 levels of leadership horsepower, and you also teach 7 laws of leadership horsepower. I'm just going to go over the levels just real quick, just so that everybody has a sense of what they are, and I'll even put it at the bottom of the screen in a banner. Level 1 of leadership horsepower is task fulfillment. Level 2 is team/crew/shift supervision. Level 3 is process management. 4 is systems general management. 5 is business model CEO. 6 is corporation of business model CEO. And 7 is corporation of corporation CEO. So that really goes into 7 deep levels here. Kind of give us, again, an overview of what this means, how does this work, and how do you use this to find gaps in leadership roles?
Yeah, so leadership horsepower is a leadership thought system that's based on multiple leadership theories, but a primary theory that it's based on is a work of a man named Elliot Jacks, and the theoretical model is called requisite organization. I call it leadership horsepower, and I've reworked it with several other theories, and I've kind of dumbed down the language. I've simplified it because Elliot Jack spoke in very high abstract language that's hard to follow him. Here's the essence of the theory. It says that every leader is functioning at one of 7 levels of mental problem solving capacity. So you may be functioning at level 2 or 3 or 4 or 5, but each level up, the problems get more complex, and they're mental problems. And by the way, all work is problem solving, which means all work essentially is a mental exercise of how do I solve this problem. And so there's 7 levels of mental complexity of how complex of a problem do you just naturally solve. They also correspond with the classic divisions of labor in organizations. You can go back and you can study all kinds of leadership and management models, and they all keep breaking out into the same core levels, that this job's at this level, this job's at this level. I was coaching a guy last Saturday and about his career direction, and a young, sharp guy, great ambition, great intelligence, a lot of potential. I said, in the role that you are right now in your organization, how would you describe the level of that role? And he said, middle management. I said, okay, that's a pretty good definition. What we would call that level 3. You're managing a process, a department, or a major project. And I said, is that what you want to be doing in 5 years? He said, no. So the reason I'm asking those questions is I'm trying to get a sense of what is your natural, what's your motivation, and what kind of a trajectory are you on. I'm trying to help them see it. I'm trying to help them get a plan going on how do I start seeking to be able to have the job on the trajectory that I have. So there's those 7 levels. They also correspond to levels of employment in organizations. And the holy grail of unlocking human potential in an organization is to build your organization with people who have the right capability for the level of role that they have. So you probably would not be amazed, but I keep finding it amazing every organization I go into or work in, how often it is there are people in roles that they are not properly suited for in terms of raw problem solving capacity. So they do what's called passing the monkey. One of the best leadership and management articles I've ever seen came out of Harvard Business Review called "Who's Got the Monkey?" And the monkey is the metaphor for it's your job, it's your responsibility, that's your problem to fix. But you can work in some organizations where there'll be somebody who's they're always trying to give somebody else their monkey. They're trying to give their monkey back to their manager. Like, well, what about this? How do you do this? And they should be able to figure that out at their level if they're truly should be at the role that they're in. So some people are working below their level, and when you are working in a role below your level, it makes you bored out of your gourd, and it can even lead to depression. If you're working above your level, you're so overwhelmed and you're so overstressed because you just can't get your mind around the problem and the solutions. And that also leads to stress and distress. So, it's kind of like the story of Goldilocks and the what was it? Goldilocks and the three bears. And she, one was too hot, one was too cold, one was just right. One bed was too big, one was just, well, there's a size for you of a roll that's too big, one's too little, but there's one that's just right.
That's a great analogy.
So the holy grail of organizational design is what roles you need and at what levels they are, and then you match them with people who have into it. When we talk a little bit more about choosing talent. When you choose talent for your organization, there's 4 things that you want to fit. But one of them is their leadership horsepower, their natural leadership profile, the kind of problems they naturally solve, it fits that role. And when it does, it's shocking to me how many of the typical management problems go away. So, I mean, you can just imagine how many people are in the wrong roles or wrong size of a role, and it boogers up the flow of work, because theoretically work should flow from the top leader, because the top leader sets the general vision of where we're going. Your next one down tend to be kind of like general managers. Well, they're taking that vision and they're passing it on to the different departments. Then it comes down to the managers who run departments. Well, they ought to be in line with everybody above them, but now they're delivering it to the people in the department level. And then that goes down to the team leaders. And if the team leaders are like, man, I'm on board with what's coming all the way down, and then down to the frontline operator who is working the front counter at McDonald's, or operating a tractor on a construction site, or all kinds of these roles that interface with a customer or some kind of a machine that they're dealing with. And when it flows from the top to the bottom, because everybody got it, and the way that functioned at each level, when everybody has that capacity, man, it unleashes human capability. There's an amazing concept.
Yeah.
The purpose of putting people together to work. Why don't we all just go work by ourselves?
Yeah.
Because theoretically, it's like the body of Christ, in a sense that you have all these different talents and capabilities. And theoretically, if we all work together and use each other's strengths, it ought to unleash all of us even more. That's the bottom line purpose of all organizational theory. How do we unleash human capability? And I believe that this theory does it the best. It's been my experience, and it makes the most sense to me.
Yeah, so I've always used the illustration of a bus, and you want to have the right people on the bus, which is your organization, because if you have the wrong people on the bus with the wrong attitude, the wrong vision and everything, they can just cause chaos in an organization. But then if you get the right people on the right bus, now you got to determine what is the right seat for those people. Because there are some people within an organization that are on the right bus, they're a great fit for the organization, but they're not working within their strengths. They may be in a leadership role, and maybe they're not a leader. Maybe they have no desire to be a leader, but they're supervising people. There are people in an organization that gets promoted to a leadership role from a entry level role because they're great at what they did at the entry level role, but they get promoted to leadership and they're horrible leaders. Well, there's a whole theory with all that. So I'm of the same mindset that you got to find the right people for the right bus, but you also got to place them in the right seat. And I love the monkey analogy that you said. I've always heard the analogy of people feeding their own monkeys. And when someone's monkey is not fed, what happens? It dies. And when it dies, what happens? It stinks. And so a lot of people say, well, you can tell their monkey died because they haven't been feeding their monkey. Well, we can put that into an analogy of working for an organization, is that we are actually feeding our monkey in the fact that we are working in our strengths and operating in the roles that we're naturally designed to be. So you have the leadership horsepower that you've just described briefly. And there's another aspect of which you mentioned earlier, and that is the natural leadership profile. What is the natural leadership profile, and how does that correspond with the leadership horsepower framework that you described?
They're the same thing. One is the thought system, that's leadership horsepower. The other is the assessment. Where are you in the leadership horsepower? I often describe trying to get the right fit on the bus, so to speak. I describe it as you need to get them in the right seat vertically, which means how high in the organization, how high a level of responsibility is the right fit for them. But then there is a horizontal question, which you were talking about, is this is their calling, is one way of saying it. This is their strengths. This is the knowledge and skill that they are gravitate to, and they've got it, or they're learning it well. So you're kind of horizontally getting that. One of the tools that I like to use for that is Patrick Lencioni's 6 Working Geniuses, and his theory is that of the 6 working genius, every organization needs to be sure that every one of those 6 is covered. And his theoretical model says everybody has 2 of those working zones are your genius. You're competent in 2, and then you shouldn't even be touching the other 2. And everybody kind of has a different mix of how that works. But one of the things that helps you do is it helps you understand horizontally now at that level, this is the kind of stuff they really do well, and how we get that horizontal fit.
Let's talk details about how you actually start with somebody you're working with directly. And you work directly with me. I was a candidate that you did the leadership horsepower and the natural leadership profile on me personally before we even had this podcast. And you spent, I think, about 45 minutes to an hour with me asking me all kinds of questions. And I answered the questions, and then you took that. So I don't want to explain the process. If someone comes to you and says, I want to know how you can work with me as a leader for this horsepower leadership framework, what's that process look like for someone coming to you wanting you to do this for them?
Yeah, we start out with an initial free consultation because I need to know their story, and I need to know what their dreams are, what their aspirations are, what are you trying to accomplish, what do you want to do. I want to know what their frustrations are, what seem to be the blocks and the barriers that are making it difficult for them to realize their aspirations. So what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to get my initial sense of that puzzle in my mind of, okay, this is the kind of person you are, this is what you're trying to do, but here's some gaps that are keeping you from getting what you need on that. And so sometimes there can be some initial issues that I see right away that I'll ask them about and talk them through, and they can start working on those right away, because they may be some pretty clear barriers that would be helpful for them to work on, to make progress in what they're trying to do. If we feel like, hey, you'd be a good candidate for this assessment, then we'll do the assessment on them. And what their assessment will give us is it will tell us at their age, this is the level of problem solving that their mind is doing. Now, the crazy thing about this theory, and it has been verified through robust research over a lot of years and thousands of people in that research process, is if we know that you are at that level at, let's say, at age 50, we know where you were at age 40, we know where you were at age 30, and we know where you are at age 20. And so sometimes, once when I'm talking the client through it, once we now have the assessments complete and it's giving us their results, I'll explain where they are now and their highest natural capacity is right now. And by the way, it's where they ought to be focusing their time and attention if they can't. A lot of times people can't, so we have to do things to help them get on it more. But when I start going back into the history and say, well, this is why you were at that level and doing what you were doing when you were 30, they're like, oh my gosh. And it tells us, okay, that's where you're at 50. Here's where you need to be planning on where you're going to be at 60. And if you plan on working that long, here's where you potentially could be at 70. And you need to, this helps you plan your career. This helps you plan the growth of your organization. So what starts coming is not only the ability to focus your own life, but it starts giving you an organizational architecture. The organizational architecture, in other words, what kind of people and what kind of roles doing what kind of work, what would be perfect for you right now to be able to maximize what you're good at. And in 10 years, where you're going to be, what you need to be planning on, how you want your organization to grow in terms of what kind of talent, what kind of roles you want people to be doing in the future. So that's the kind of consulting that we do with them. We just did it at all kinds of different levels. Some it's just, that's kind of the end of it. We give them the big picture. They're good. They take it, they run, and they go crazy with it. There's others that want to do a full-blown advisory where we bring in what we call the 7 state-of-the-art management or business systems. I work with some private equity groups, and I really learned it from the private equity world. There's a pretty standard system that if you go with McKinsey, which is the biggest one in the world, or smaller ones like Korn Ferry or Grant Thornton, these kind of consulting firms, they have these standardized state-of-the-art business systems that one by one, they're like blocks of, you have to have this in place, and then you have to have this in place. So we'll walk them through those 7 systems. They may already have some of them pretty good in place, but they may have a couple. Hey, let's get these up to stuff. And with the right people, with the right capabilities, and the right systems in place, man, you can really do everything you want to do with your calling.
Is there ever a possibility that someone does not or will never have any strong leadership capabilities or capacities to lead people. I know we've always heard that leaders are naturally born. And yes, there are some people who are more natural born leaders. They have natural instincts of leadership. But then there are some people like myself. I wasn't born with natural leadership abilities. I developed them over time. I was mentored, I was trained, I read books, I went to seminars and webinars and all of that. Is there ever a time that you think from your experience that someone should not be in leadership? They just, no matter how much training, development, reading, anything, that they're just will never ever have the capacity to be a leader?
They certainly should not be in leadership if they don't want it, because you have to desire the role. No matter what you're doing, you have to desire the role to put your full self into anything, and you shouldn't be wasting your time on something that you don't have the desire for. And so some people, they just don't want it. Some people do not want the level of responsibility. So there's different levels of leadership where some people are great at leading themselves and maybe one or two other people that are helping them. Like when I was a teenager, I started a painting business, and I had a couple of numbskull friends that I kind of supervised them, and we went and contracted houses, So I was the lead guy. That was about a level one, almost a level two organization right there. So I had the desire, but a lot of people at that level, they're not yet developed enough. They don't want that level of responsibility. So each level up is a higher level of responsibility. So some do have a desire for level two. A solid level two is like a foreman on a job. He's got a crew, or she's got a crew, or she's running a shift at McDonald's, and she's running that shift crew, and she or he, they like doing it, man. They like being in charge for that crew, but that's the level they want. They do not want to manage the whole restaurant. They want to manage that shift. So I would say most people have a desire to lead at some level. Very few want to lead at the higher levels, because if they don't have that raw mental capacity and hunger to solve more complex problems. This is another just model of how to think of leadership. The reason why any of us follow somebody is because they're solving problems that we wanted solved. And we either didn't feel like we could solve it, or we're going to be in a position where we could solve it. But because they solve it the way we think it needs to be solved, or in a way we like, we're going to follow them. And the people who solve those problems, it doesn't feel like a burden to them to figure that out and solve it like maybe it would feel like to us, because they just feel like, oh man, mentally, where do you start? Nobody wants that kind of work. Nobody wants the kind of work like, I have no idea where I would even possibly begin on that. Years ago, when I was pastoring, I had a guy on our board. It was a super faithful guy, Sunday school teacher, would serve in any way you asked him to. He was a water truck driver in the oil field. And trucking companies in the oil field, one of the hard things is to get everybody to show up sober on Monday. This guy, he was a steady Freddy. I mean, he was there every time, sober, ready to go, great truck driver. So his manager said, hey, man, I want you to come into the office and become a supervisor of the truck. He's like, no, I don't want to do that. They're like, no, we're going to give you more pay. We're going to give you more benefits. Please, please. Because they just see what a faithful guy is. So they put him in the role. And 6 months after that, he went back to his boss, and he was begging them and saying, please, please let me go back to my truck. I'm a happy camper, because I go out to what are called the Chusca Mountains in New Mexico. I get to the Chusca Mountains where there's almost always snow on the overpass, and I know where I pull my truck over, and I get out and I put my chains on my tires, and I go do my run, and I come back and I have a safe run that day. That's a fulfilling day for me. So what he was saying is, there's a certain level of problem I like to solve. How do I get that truck out and back full, do my load, not have any trouble? That's the problem. I do not want to solve people problems.
So what's your definition of leadership?
Well, yeah, and I answer it in a real elementary way, and I just this, and that leadership is having followers. At some point in your life, you'll look behind you and you may have followers, and you realize, wow, maybe I can lead at this level. And then if you're hungry for a leader at a higher level, maybe get hunger for it. Let me give you another characteristic of leadership. It's not a definition, but I love this statement, and that is that leaders take people where they would not go by themselves. I love that one. I was with some friends. We went to a sushi restaurant in Durango, Colorado. I used to live just south of Durango, Colorado, in Farmington, New Mexico. That's where I pastored for a lot of years. But we were at a sushi restaurant in Durango, and they opened at 5 in the evening, and we got there a little bit before 5, and the front door was open. So we walked in. We're in this little waiting area. Nobody's there except us and all the staff. And the restaurant, or the shift manager or the restaurant manager, he's got all the staff, the cooks and everybody in the front room for their pep rally and prep meeting for that shift, for that evening shift. So he is going over all the fresh product that's in, all the fresh seafood that's in. He's going over the specials for the night that they really wanted to push because it's great quality stuff and they feel like they're going to give their people a good experience. Then he goes over about 3 key things that they're really focusing on to give the customers a great experience. At the end of it, he says, all right, everybody get your hand in here. And on 3, it's go team. Well, I mean, he was so inspirational. He's so fired up and he was so powered up about it that had that been a church, I would have joined it right there. To me, that was leadership because that wait staff, those people working all the different parts of that restaurant, they all do it with focus. They do it with energy. They all know what the specials are. They all know what we're the customer service stuff that we're emphasizing. They wouldn't be functioning that way without a leader. Now, that's not a real complex example of leadership, but that's leadership, man. It's whatever you call that, it's doing that.
Yeah, I've always heard John Maxwell has the most simplest version. It's leadership is influence. Now, the academic version of leadership definition is the process by which a person leads other people towards a specific goal or goals. So it's a process. As we close out this podcast, one last question I want to ask you, and really I want you to give short advice to potential leaders who are coming on the scene, whether they're young green leaders who are just becoming on the scene in leadership roles, maybe some of them may be more seasoned and they've never had any foundational principles of leadership. Do you have any advice for anybody in leadership, things they really need to focus on at a foundational level?
I believe that every kind of work is really learned by doing it. Whether you're a pro baseball player or whether you're a house painter or whether you're a pastor or whatever you're going to be, you go to school and you learn all this stuff. But the fact is, you don't know what you're doing until you get out there and do it. And I would say if you feel a hunger to lead, then seek that place of leadership that you're most drawn to and seek the opportunity. When I was 16 years old, I went to the guy at our church that was administrating the Sunday school system. And I said, I want to teach Sunday school. Do you have a class I could have? Initially they didn't, but before long, a 4th grade boys class opened up. And man, my first Sunday in that class, I was shaken. I was nervous, but then I settled into it. I think that was my first time kind of in a spiritual context to say, I'd like to have spiritual leadership. And that's where I feel like I want to give it a shot and see if, God would bless it, if I can figure this out and be used. So I would say that. And then I guess my second one is just look for the best examples that you can find. Find those leaders that you go look at those ones that, man, you resonate with them. I've always been a reader. So, reading in the leadership genre, management theory genre, all that, I always have a stack of books that I'm working on in that field. So I'm a strong introvert. And as a strong introvert, I take in ideas really well as a reader. I don't have to sit down and have the conversations but when I do, and when I'm around them, I try to soak up and watch and observe everything I can with the ones that I really respect. So I think you have got to follow that sense of, I feel a compulsion by the Spirit of God that I need to try this. I feel like God is telling me to step up and step out and take a risk and let's go try some of this. Am I going to be a manager over here in business? Am I going to be an entrepreneur over here? Am I going to be a bureaucrat in government? Am I going to be a leader in ministry? Whatever it is I'm going to be, take my best step out there by faith. It's just as much a by faith thing of anything else in our faith walk that we do, following God's leadership and how, what's my next step of graduating as a leader.
Well, it's great advice, and you've given so much meat and potatoes in these few minutes we've had together. And I know there's so much more that you could give. Sometime in the future, I want to have you back, kind of unpack a lot more knowledge and information that you have for my listeners. I want to thank you for being on here. There are people out there that want to know how to get a hold of you, how to get a hold of your books, how to know what services you offer. So tell us how people can reach out to you.
For the leadership stuff, I would encourage you to go to my website for that, which is drjohnmorgan.com. It's just dr, no period, drjohnmorgan.com. If you are interested in the nonprofit work that we're doing in the poverty space, that website is peopleprosper.org. And love to communicate with you. There's ways to contact us on both those sites. We offer a free initial consultation on leadership issues. If you want to do that with us, we'd be happy to do that with you on Dr. John Morgan website. So, Todd, I appreciate it, man. This has been great to be with you too, brother.
Thank you again. And so those of you who want to know more about what I do in my organization called Leadwell Solutions, you can just simply go to leadwellsolutions.us. That's my website. You can find out all the services that I offer. You can also purchase my book called The Dysfunctional Leader. I'm in the process of writing my second book right now called The Functional Leader that will be out soon, and you'll be able to buy that off the website as well. Thank you for joining us today. There'll be at the bottom of the screen different ways to reach out to me as well, and go out and do the right thing and lead well.